Well, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. And if you're in Australia, good night.
Good evening.
Oh,
Welcome. Welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa. So happy to have you all here. And again, on our focus on Australia with Kerri Saint. By now, she's a regular. You all know her. And very happy to have a beautiful guest with us, Dr. Christine Cole. So, welcome everybody. And I'm always so delighted to have these types of conversations because they are so necessary as part of our awakening journey, right? So, it's really good to have you ladies with me today. But, Kerri, I'm going to hand over to you so you can introduce Dr. Christine Cole and give us all a rundown on what we're going to be.
Once I go through this, you'll want to keep inviting her back. But I met Christine back in about 2009 when I went public with my story. Christine doesn't live in the same state as myself and had been lobbying for many, many years, and we hadn't crossed paths until I went public for the first time. And my story came up in her feed in her internet, and she contacted me directly, and we've had a really great working relationship since. Chris has taught me so much about forced adoption, what's happened specifically to the mothers, because Christine is a survivor of forced adoption herself. She had her child stolen from her, so she'll talk about that tonight. And Chris will probably talk about some of the things we collaborated on together. But I'll give you a bit of a rundown. Dr. Christine Cole has been involved in activism for mothers and survivors of their stolen babies since 1994, when she joined an activist support group, Mothers for Contact. In 1995, she worked with her local Member of Parliament, Pat Rogan, to gain the historic New South Wales Upper House inquiry into the legal and unethical practices in adoption. Dr. Cole formed another group, Action for Rights of Mothers and Children, which she represented until 2008 when she formed the Apology Alliance Australia. Dr. Cole sat on the Committee on Adoption and Permanent Care, representing mothers from 1994 to 2009. She was a keynote speaker in 1994 at National Adoption Conference in Sydney, was invited to be the keynote speaker at a national conference held by the Natural Parents Support Group in Felixstowe, UK in 1998. She assisted the committee in organising the 9th National Adoption Conference, 2008, which launched her book, Releasing the Past, Mothers' Stories of Their Stolen Babies. And this book was acknowledged by the former Prime Minister Julia Gillard, who was gifted with a copy. In 2008, she set up the Apology Alliance Australia, worked with mothers, adoptees and mental health professionals and politicians to successfully gain apologies in all states here in Australia, climaxing the federal apology given by the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, at the time. Dr. Cole sat on the 2 federal committees, one that drafted the PM's federal apology and the second advising the government on the need for mental health services for mothers. In 2013, she produced 2-volume theses exposing illegal and unethical practices inherent in historical adoptions. She was nominated for Australian of the Year 2012 and 13, and you can research. We'll get her to put in where you can find her blog, theapologyalliance.com, later on. 2014, we both got invited to meet Jan Barnham to present at New South Wales Parliament House on the need for better mental health services for mothers and adoptees and their biological families. And she's been involved in helping set up remembrance days and memorials. And where we go, was presented at the Western Sydney University, where she also tutored. She's appeared on multiple TV programs, has done numerous phone interviews. Apology Alliance Australia has been publicly acknowledged by Kate Gallagher, then the Chief Minister of the ACT, now the Federal Minister for Women, when giving her apology on behalf of the Australian Capital Territory, Canberra. The Apology Alliance has also been honoured by being acknowledged on a plaque and memorial put up by a West Australian Mothers Group. So At present, you're sitting on the New South Wales Memorial Consultative Committee, working to get a memorial erected on a prominent site in Sydney. And she formerly sat on the Federally Forced Adoption Apology Reference Committee. And she's also been on the Forced Adoption Implementation Working Group 2013. So Chris has been exceptionally busy, more busy than me.
I don't know, you're pretty busy, Kerri.
Yeah. So people would understand why I've invited Chris to be a part of this interview. I think she's an absolute wealth of information, and she can certainly give a very accurate historical view of former forced adoptions, because she's not only a very expertise sort of gifted educator, but also she's a victim of forced adoption and experienced it firsthand of having her child stolen. So, Chris, that was a long spiel, but it was well worth it. I'd like to welcome you for being here. And this is the first time that you and Chantel have actually met.
Yeah,
and I'm very excited to have you here, because I'm just going to sit back for most of the time and keep my mouth.
Are you really? Cheers.
Probably not.
Probably not.
I was saying cheers, we're going to listen to Chris. I mean, I think that's actually wonderful that you're here. And I mean, I really very impressed by what your achievements are. There's so many, I couldn't name them back now. But it's really good to know that people like yourself have been out there for so long. It just strikes me that, when I hear this, and for the amount of time that you have been doing this, so many of us feel so alone in the world, right? When we're on these paths of trailblazing, whatever it might be, sort of bringing light into the dark, creating awareness. And we're up against so much, a lot of the time. And it's really good to come across fellow men and women, right, who've been doing the same thing. And we really haven't been alone at the end of the day. We've all been in this together. So it's really just highlights that for me, which is really, it's great. So welcome.
Thank you. I think one of the driving impetus for me to do the things that I have done was for that very exact reason, that when I'll go into the details of what happened to me so people can understand from where I'm coming from my own lived experience. But we were so isolated at the time. We were made to feel like it was only us. There was something wrong with us as an individual. And that's why we had our babies taken off us, because we weren't good enough to be mothers. So I'll just sort of frame it this way. So when I tell relate my lived experience, people will get an understanding of the illegality and the human rights abuses that were perpetrated. Otherwise, people sometimes think, well, they hear the term forced adoption and you think, oh, well, maybe there was a little bit of coercion, maybe it was difficult for the young woman, maybe she was talked into it, maybe she was concerned about the money, oh, it was the parents who made the decision. All this stuff has been, and the reason why people do that is because for 100 years in Australia, the population generally has been gaslit by the government. The society was told basically there were all these unwanted babies, when the government knew that was a lie. But if you think about it, and the parallel which would be current would be when people talk about gender affirming surgery. Now, I call that genital mutilation. I don't gaslight people with something that is so serious and has such dreadful lifelong impacts on the people that kind of gaslighting wants to manipulate. Now, for the Australian society to accept that all these mothers gave their babies away because they wanted to get on with their lives, which is a total absurdity, then they would have to be told the same level of lies, propaganda, and gaslighting. So through the magazine, through newspapers, society was told that, oh, these poor unwed mothers, they wanted to get on with their lives and, they wanted to finish their education or be in work or whatever, which was all lies. What was really happening behind the scenes was that mothers were being bullied, coerced, lied to, and it was mothers who did not have any support. And there's also another fallacy, and that was, well, that was just the social mores, all these unwed mothers, well, because they were so young and because, they didn't have the experience needed, then they just gave their babies away to get on with a better life. Well, I mean, you think about it, the strongest instinct a mother has is their maternal instinct. They'll die for their baby. They will die to protect their baby. So why, to get people to believe that in 1 year, in 1971 to June 72, in a population of around 13 million people, supposedly 10,000 healthy young women gave their babies away to strangers to get on with their lives.
That was each
strangers. It's ludicrous. It's an absurdity. The strongest maternal instinct that drives you to protect your newborn, that all these women suddenly just decided, oh no, I don't want my baby. I'm going to give it to strangers, and I'll just get on with my life. And nonsense. And if you think about it, this has been the last 100 years. We've had it in lots of different areas, but with breaking up biological families in particular, I believe we were the canaries in the coal mine. They started breaking up our families. There's my daughter as a baby. I didn't see that. I don't know if you can see it a bit with the blur on, but that's my baby, right? I gave birth to her in February 1969. When I went into the hospital, I had every intention of leaving the hospital with my baby. But if you were unsupported and didn't have people in the hospital at the ready to make sure that your rights were not preyed upon, you were basically put on a conveyor belt. Now, that conveyor belt started when you went into the hospital as a pregnant young mother. If you were unmarried, they would secretly mark our files with BFA, baby for adoption, or UBA, unmarried, baby for adoption. This is why we were still 4 months pregnant. This is totally illegal, and this was a secret coding put onto our records, onto our files, when we're only 3, 4, 5 months pregnant. So that meant every time we came to visit the hospital, we had to go and see the social worker, who would then go on with the brainwashing and the gaslighting and saying, oh, well, dear, you want to do the right thing for your baby, don't you? You don't want to cause your baby any harm. We've got this lovely couple that can give you all the things that you can't give. They're a married couple, so they'll be able to provide the education, whatever. And this was constant, and it was reinforced with, well, you don't want to harm your child, do you, dear? Don't want to harm your child. All this was scripted. It was full-on MK Ultra brainwashing. Then when you got into the hospital, now I had told the social worker at the very first meeting that I was in love with the father of my baby, that we planned to get married. So this was, when they targeted me, they targeted a little family. Maybe not a married family, but a family nevertheless. A father who wanted to keep his baby, a father who wanted to marry the mother later on. And so I went in and I told the social worker this. She still marked my files baby for adoption because I didn't have the support of my parents. And they knew that if we had support of our parents, or we had a large social network, or we were older and had friends, they couldn't get away with stealing our children. So if they had the opportunity, they made it their business to really undermine any support we had. So they would tell the grandparents, oh, well, it will ruin your child's life. It will ruin your daughter's life. Oh, it'd be terrible for your grandchild. It will be the worst thing. So they would play. And remembering, my mother at the time was only 37 years old. It's pretty young, I think. And she's had all this religious background with being a Catholic. And then she's, instead of being told, which was what the social worker legally was supposed to do, is to say, well, this could cause deep psychological damage to your daughter if she's separated from her baby. They didn't say that. They said the absolute opposite. They lied. Again, the propaganda, the gaslighting. No, this is going to ruin your grandchild's life. You don't want to ruin your grandchild's life. Your daughter will have a much better life. She'll be able to go on and finish her education and all this stuff. So anyway, so that undermined the support of my parents. Then I was, the hospital I went to, Crown Street Women's Hospital, they found a housekeeping job for me. Now, on the one hand, the social worker's telling me I'm incompetent, too immature to look after my own baby when she's born, but they put me as a housekeeper to look after a wealthy woman and her husband, clean and cook meals in her house and look after her 3 children, 2 of whom weren't toilet trained. So I'm doing all this work in a great big house. I must have worked about 90 hours a week. And I think I got paid about $10. So it was a couple of cents an hour. You're on call from 6 o'clock in the morning till 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So then I worked right up to I went into the hospital. And when I went into the hospital, I don't know if my dates weren't correct or not, but I was basically examined by a group of trainee doctors, which was absolutely so humiliating. I remember having my nightie lifted up in front of all these trainee doctors. I had my nipples squeezed. I was, this older doctor who had these younger students was saying, well, this is what a pregnant woman of 34 weeks pregnant looks like. And he said, I remember he said this, he said, the head is not yet engaged. You can see the baby is still sitting up high. So that's all I got told about my baby and my state of my pregnancy whilst I was at the hospital, because one of their techniques was to not only isolate you, but keep you in a state of confusion and a state of not knowing what was going to happen next. So then about 3 or 4 days later, I remember a nurse coming to get me and saying, oh, you've got to go upstairs, but didn't tell me where I was going, just said, oh, you've got to go upstairs. And I thought, oh, well, what's this, another examination? So I go up into the labour ward. So they lay me down, and then all of a sudden they give me a big shot of pethidine, which is, as you know, is a large shot because it knocked me unconscious. And as I'm feeling myself start to become unconscious, I panicked. And I'm saying, what's happening to me? What's happening to me? And I remember there was only one doctor. He was an Asian doctor, and he was the only one who spoke nicely to me. Everybody else was really aggressive and rude and matter of fact and just, treated me like I was a subhuman. Anyway, so I awoke about 3 hours later. The Asian doctor said, don't fight it, just try and go with it. So I basically then stopped fighting. But I thought they were trying to kill me. I didn't know what was happening to me. And so I'm 16. I'm in a labour ward. Supposedly my baby's not even ready to be born because the head's not engaged. And so they go ahead to induce the birth. They wanted to make, I believe, the birth as painful as possible. Because inducing the birth, you can imagine if the baby's head's not engaged, is like being tortured. And it was a form of torture. So I wake up about 3 hours later and I felt like my body was being split apart. It was the most excruciating pain I've ever felt. And I've had 2 babies after that. It was nothing like this. This was shocking. The pain was unbearable. Anyway, I'm flailing around thinking I'm going to die, and I accidentally knocked one of the nurse's pockets. she punched me in the arm and said, "Don't touch me." And I remember I looked around and I saw these two nurses standing there. One was shorter, one was tall. The tall one sort of looked down to the shorter one and said, "Don't hit her. She's only a baby having a baby." And she said, "Well, she shouldn't have hit my pocket." That was the attitude towards a young, terrified, pregnant mother. Anyway, so they were then inducing me with chemicals, inducing the birth, which made the birth very, very painful. And because they had given me so many drugs, when I actually gave birth, my baby didn't cry. So in those days, I used to smack the baby on the bottom and the baby used to cry, if you remember. Anyway, that's how they did it in the 60s and probably the early 70s. So my baby didn't cry. So I panicked. As a mother would, like I said, the maternal instinct. It wasn't I just laid there. I tried to get up. And I said, "What's wrong? What's wrong with my baby?" And then as I tried to sit up, 3 nurses grabbed me, pushed me back assaulted me, pushed me back onto the bed. And I heard one of them at the end of the bed say, "This has got nothing to do with you." And as they pushed me back, a pillow that they had placed, I hadn't seen it before because I'd been in so much pain, fell off. And that pillow was then put back on my chest because they did not want any eye contact between mother and baby. And then immediately my baby was whipped out of the maternity ward. So even I am 71 years old, I've never seen my baby's face. The picture I've got was given to me by my daughter when she was 18 years old. You don't get over that. All the gaslighting, the lies and the propaganda and the basic BS, you never, ever get over it. I don't care what anybody says. You don't get on with your life. Your life as you knew it is finished. The only comparison I can make, or the feeling that somebody that would understand, is someone who had their baby kidnapped, because that's what it's like. They can say, "Oh, your baby's adopted." What does adoption mean to that part of me that's to do with life and death and having a baby? It doesn't mean anything. Adoption's just a word. It's a concept that men have made up. It's the tearing away, a tearing apart of that mother-child bond. And in the process of doing that, damages both extraordinarily. So then the next day when I woke up, I'm crying. I'm asking, "Where's my baby? Where's my baby?" So then somebody turns up, an older man, and I'm crying, and he thinks, he said, "I'm sorry it took me so long to get here." And I didn't know what he was talking about. Get here? What do you mean get here? And they loaded me up in an ambulance, removed me from the hospital so I would not be able to find my baby. So I'd have no access to my baby. So they took me, remember, 16-year-old girl, I'm in a hospital miles away from where I grew up. They take me to an annex of the hospital that's like a little prison. It's locked up. You don't have any access to your clothes or money. And then I started crying. "I want to see my baby. Where's my baby? Please bring my baby. Where's my baby?" And so I'm basically told, "No, you can't see your baby. Your baby's at the hospital. You're here. You're miles away." So then, because I kept asking, because I'm making a fuss, because I'm crying, they then kept drugging me and drugging me. Sodium pentobarbital, sodium amytal, chloral hydrate, all mind-altering barbiturates. Now, if there was something I wanted to do, why did they have to drug me like that? Why did they have to keep me a prisoner? Why did they have to move me? I didn't give any permission for that to happen. And just to explain how illegal what they did was, if suddenly somebody came to me and said, "Oh, Chris Cole, you've got to go back to Ireland where your ancestors came from because we're putting you under the Migration Act." And I'd say, "But I was born in Australia. The Migration Act doesn't apply to me. Oh, no, we've just decided we're putting you under the Migration Act and we're going to send you off to Ireland. That's what they did to us. They put us under an act that we had no right being under. It was using legislation to cover up a crime. I was not under adoption legislation when my baby was born. Just by virtue of giving birth, I, as the mother, had full guardianship of my baby. It was my baby. It wasn't some stranger that was going to come and pick up the baby in 2 weeks' time. This was my baby. It was my partner's baby. It was my family's baby. It was belonging to my biological heritage and my biological family. This was my blood, my flesh and blood that they were ripping from me and had ripped from me at the very birth. And so the pain is just so the pain was so extraordinary, and not being able to see my baby was so shocking and so traumatizing. And the drugs that they were giving me, and the trauma of feeling so helpless, so powerless. After a day or so, I don't remember. I have no memory for the next 4 days. I don't remember until someone came with a piece of paper and said, "You've got to sign this or you can't leave." I'm 16. I'm drugged to the eyeballs. I have to sign what an adoption consent is, which is a contract. So they're forcing me to sign this contract by using coercion, mind control, and drugs. Makes it totally illegal. Like I said, I was not under the Adoption of Children Act. By virtue of giving birth, the baby was mine, and I had the same right of access as any other mother did. I wasn't under any act, and there were specific criteria that had to be met before the Adoption Act came into being, or what they call in law, legal terms, before it was enlivened. You can't just put somebody under legislation that doesn't apply to them. It didn't apply to me because I had not given permission. I didn't give them permission to use a pillow at the birth. I didn't give them permission to give me all those drugs. I didn't give them permission to take my baby away and hide her. That was abduction, and that was kidnap. I did not give them permission to take me miles away from where I had given birth to an annex of the hospital to be held there as a prisoner. That was kidnapping me. Now, as far as the Adoption of Children Act, for that to come into being, very specific criteria had to be met. And that is the mother, after all alternatives were given to her, after all options were explained to her, the financial benefits that were available, and there were available financial benefits, the fact that you could get housing, accommodation support. There were lots of benefits that were available to single mothers who wanted to keep their babies. But if you did not have support, you weren't given that information. And by law, they had to give you that information, because only after all your options and alternatives and supports were explained to you, but you still insisted, "Oh, no, I'm not concerned about the psychological damage. No, I'm not concerned that I'm going to get $27 a week. No, I'm not worried about I could get milk and I could get accommodation. No, I don't want any of that," which was what was supposed to happen, before the Act came into being. That was the criteria that had to be met. And only after all that was explained to me, and I still insisted, then and only then were papers allowed to be brought to me for me to read. If I was in any way distressed, then they could not take a signature, because you weren't supposed to take a signature from a distressed mother. I was obviously distressed. I was screaming. I was crying. I was beside myself. And when I went back to the hospital 2 months later to tell the social worker I wanted my baby, where was she? and the social worker just said, "Oh, sorry, dear, she's been adopted. Everybody else has got on with their lives. You should have." She's marked on my social work papers, "Mother is still distressed over baby." So
As
they
if
had.
that must, sorry, Chris, I'm sorry, but as if that's not natural for a mother to be distressed.
Well, they tried to isolate me by saying, "Well, you're the only one, dear, that's come back." And of course, as you know, years later, how many mothers did we speak to? Except we weren't supposed to go back to the hospital or the social worker. We were supposed to go to the Supreme Court to revoke our consent. But none of us were told that. So we went back to the hospital that stole our babies. So it's not really, forced adoption doesn't really explain really what happened. What happened was that it was part of a stolen generation, a non-Indigenous stolen generation, where mothers have stolen babies. Our babies shouldn't really refer to themselves as being forced adoptees. They were part of a stolen generation of non-Indigenous babies coming from every ethnicity. There were many migrant mothers coming from Czechoslovakia or who didn't speak much English, older mothers who didn't have any social network. We were the ones that they preyed upon, the ones who did not have support services, because if anybody had called the police who could afford a lawyer, they would have been charged with the theft of a child. So therefore, they only preyed upon those who they thought they could get away with it. So that's my story, and it took me about 5 years before I could even discuss it, before I even mentioned that I had a daughter. I was so traumatized and I was so guilt-ridden that I had not been able to keep my baby, that somehow I'd failed, as a mother. And it was only when in 1994 when I joined the Mothers for Contact group and started researching, I realised how utterly helpless I was and what a systematic, as Dr. Jeff Rickaby said, well-oiled process the whole theft of the babies was. Yeah. It was very well-oiled. And the adoption industry, as it labels itself, would say things and kept gaslighting people right up until we got the New South Wales inquiry in 1998 and kept saying, well, the mothers made the choice. It was difficult at the time. It was the social mores. All the lies. Yes. If it was the social mores, why, when we started speaking out originally, people didn't believe us? They didn't believe what we said. How could that happen in Australia in a public hospital? And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do my thesis, to contextualise how this could happen in Australia, in public hospitals, how people could get away with it, how they could use the drugs and the brainwashing, how they could get away with all of this. So I explain all of that in my thesis and a small amount of it in my little book.
Hey, Chris, were you ever given stilovistrol? Do you know?
Yes.
Did you ever get? Yes. So you just want to explain what stilovistrol is for those that may not know?
Stilbestrol is a carcinogenic hormone, which was illegal to inject into us because we gave no permission for this injection. They injected us immediately after the birth to dry up our milk. So 200 milligrams injectable, and then pills after that to dry up the milk so we could not nurse our babies. It's a carcinogenic drug. Imagine your whole body is being prepared to nurture your baby, and then they stab you with a drug, still a carcinogenic drug, without my permission, never gave permission for it. Nobody in my family ever gave permission for it. And that dried up my milk, and there's many mothers who never could feed their subsequent children. Their milk never came in. It so impacted their brain, shocking the pituitary or pineal gland, whichever one is involved in that, and they could not feed their subsequent children. I could feed my 2 subsequent sons for a couple of months. In one case, 4 months was the longest, then my milk just dried up. And I didn't know why. And it wasn't until many years later, and I spoke to a lot of other mothers, and they said, oh, you were lucky, we couldn't feed at all. Their milk never came in. So there was just crime upon crime upon crime, really.
I'm interested to know, I'm always going to ask these questions. When this was going on with you and your child was stolen from you, where was your family? I know that you said earlier they were not supportive of this pregnancy, but where were they okay with what was going on?
They didn't know that I had been drugged. I didn't even know that I had been drugged until I got my medical records, which was in 1994. All our records, all our files were closed up. They came round and they'd give us a little white tablet or a little pink drink or whatever. And it wasn't until I got my medical files and read them. I mean, when you're in shock and when you're in trauma and you don't know what's happening, and the doctors come round, I think they told us they were giving us iron medication or something, some kind of vitamin or something. But they were all mind-altering barbiturates. They were used by Tavistock Institute when they were doing experiments, the MK Ultra experiments. So you wonder, why did they give these drugs to the mothers? And then I find out that Dr. Harry Bailey, who run the deep sleep therapy hospital, Chelmsford Therapy, was a consulting psychiatrist. And he was giving us the same drugs that Dr. Ewan Cameron was giving his patients in Canada, and the same drugs that Dr. William Sargent, who was connected to the Tavistock Institute, was giving to his patients. So were we some kind of experiment? Unwitting patients. The MK Ultra, the programming, telling us that things like, will you go on and have children of your own one day? That's what they used to say to us. And also they would never say your baby. It was always the baby. And if you know anything about hypnosis, when they want someone to disassociate from a pain, they will say, don't say my back pain, say the back pain as a part of disassociating. Of course, I didn't know any of this at the time. This is years and years later with doing research. And so I look at, were we canaries, in the coal mine, experimenting on us to see, because part of the CIA experiments with MK Ultra was to see if they could get people to turn against their most primary instincts and then go on with their lives and forget what happened to them. And that's what they were doing with us, drugging us, those mind-altering barbiturates, the brainwashing, and then expecting us to go away. And many of us went away and were quiet and were silent. Most of the mothers were. Most of the mothers didn't start to, what I'd say, wake up, is when the laws changed in New South Wales. It was 1991, and they had an opportunity for the first time to get access to their children's files and be able to find their now adult child. That's when people started to wake up to what really it was, and it was like layers lifting of the trauma lifting. So it was like a veil that was slowly being lifted, and it was only after that people became aware of the treachery, the dishonesty, the lying, the gaslighting. And I remembered I'd be in my car driving somewhere and it would come over me in a wave. This really happened to me. And some nights I'd wake up in this sweat thinking, I've left the baby at the hospital. Now this was so the baby was born in 1969. This is in the 1990s. I'm having these like flashbacks and this kind of sensation as this trauma was starting to fully come to the surface. So because it was so awful, you to survive mentally, you have to repress it. And if somebody asked me how many children I would have, I would say 2, because if I said 3, I'd feel like I was telling a lie. That's how deep the brainwashing was. And I think it was because they combined the trauma of taking your child, not allowing you to see her or him, of the drugs, and of being told it's not your baby, you're carrying this baby for someone else.
There was plenty of mothers that have been reported that they didn't even remember giving birth to a baby. So it wasn't until years and years later, or they had their first child, or it was the inquiry, or that the child was able to track them down, that they then began to realise they'd actually given birth. That's how horrific the trauma was. They completely blocked it out. And, like Chris was saying, she was 16 at the time. And the fact that she's heavily drugged and signing consent forms to have a child adopted out, like that's totally illegal. You can't sign anything under any medication. They tell you even now, like if you go to the dentist or have a mild op or anything, they say don't sign any legal papers within a certain time frame. And yet they were drugging underaged women, and any woman that was 21 and under was underage, and drugging to the hill and then signing. And to me, as an adopted person, I'm like going, how is the adopted child, how is this adoption even legal? How is it, I can't understand how it even holds up under those circumstances. If anybody went and got themselves blind drunk and went and sold their house, once they wake up and go, oh, heck, I've sold my house, you could easily go to court and just undo the whole thing, because it wouldn't hold up. So I don't understand how all these adoptions actually hold up as being legitimate at all.
Well, they're not. They're totally illegal. And that's why many mothers are taking legal action now. And I think after going through the last 3 years of the COVID experience, of how powerless you can be if the state is against you, how you can have your powers taken over, how there can be a collaboration between so many arms of the government, of the pharmaceutical industry, of the police. And this is what happened. Mothers who tried to leave the hospital with their babies, the hospital would call the police, and those mothers would be hunted down and brought back. And the mother would be accused of kidnapping her own child. So you can only understand it if, I guess, people could probably understand it better now after being through COVID the last 3 years and seeing how many thousands of people were involved in the whole getting the COVID thing happening. And it's only now people that have been injured are taking action, and there's legal action moving forward. Only now, and you've got the whole of society. Well, when it was only the single mothers in the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s and 70s, and we had the whole system to fight. So and you had the elite in Australia who, from the early part of last century, were very eugenically minded, and adoption is very eugenically based. It was based originally on removing a child from what they considered a feeble-minded person. This is the late 1800s, early 1900s. Children would be removed if it was considered an illegitimate child, because only the feeble-minded would have an illegitimate child. In fact, we had a law in 1903, was the Infant Mortality Act, and under that act, white mothers who had babies out of wedlock were considered racially inferior. Aboriginal mothers who had white ancestry and had fair skin were also considered, not Aboriginal, they were considered racially inferior whites. And they also had their babies taken off them. And I will bet that as time moves on, they're going to find more babies were taken through as part of the stolen generation, were taken from fair-skinned Aboriginal mothers who were funneled through the hospital system. Because from the 50s, 60s and 70s, that's how, according to Link Up, which is their organisation, said the majority of babies were taken by the same doctors, nurses, social workers who were running the rackets, the child trafficking rackets in the hospital. And that's what they were, child trafficking rackets done under the guise of legislation. The legislation was just a facade to cover their crimes. Because like I said, in reality, we shouldn't have been under any act. We certainly weren't under the Adoption of Children Act.
I just want to add too, the issue around, like Chris, you were 16, and I've heard this stated by many mothers, is that where were the parents? Like, where were your parents? And yes, many of them assumed that, they weren't supporting you, but if they had known the extent of the horrific trauma which you were being exposed to and what was really happening, they would never have agreed to that.
No.
So there was a lot of the young girls went and stayed in institutions. The nuns took care of them. They were made to work in the laundries, and they were basically a jail. However, the parents,
they were a jail. They were like the Madeleine laundries in Ireland.
Yeah. So they went in, and often the grandparents, the grandparents to be, never ever got access into those. Never saw the way they were treated. Never heard how the nuns treated them. Right?
No.
They never heard the language. They never heard the abuse happening to them. They assumed they were being well cared for. They would be supported around the time of their birth, and the baby would be lovingly given away for adoption in the institutions, and they didn't know what was happening in the hospitals because they wouldn't allow them in. Same with COVID. They wouldn't let you go in for a very ill and dying, because they had all these procedures around.
So they didn't want people to see what was really going on. It was the same at Lady Wakehurst, which was the annex of Crown Street. We had no visitors. We weren't allowed any visitors there, and our clothes were locked up. And I don't think I ever told my mother about the drug. I didn't know, first of all, until the 1990s about the drugs I was given. And if you grew up in the 50s and 60s, people didn't speak the way we do now. There were many topics that you never discussed. And I never told my parents of the treatment that I got, because in a way I was thinking, well, it's all my fault. I got the treatment I deserve because I was a bad girl, because that's what they had constantly told me and made me feel like. So I never pardon.
Sorry to chime in here, and I don't want to do that. But I just wanted to highlight on that as well, because I'm sure that would have been a lot of their psychological blackmail, if you will, that they would have used. You were 16, you were pregnant, you were single, you're a bad girl, you're irresponsible, not even mommy and daddy want to support you in this decision. So that would have been really sort of breaking you down. And I can imagine they would do that systematically over time, as you say, giving you hard labor for a pregnant girl, right? You're sort of doing whatever you can, minimum wage, you're paying your dues, you're being broken down every day. But I just want to clarify, from what I'm understanding, your baby, you did not want to give up for adoption. So there was a full idea that you'd be coming home with your infant, right? Your little one. But where did your parents fit into this? Because if they were thinking you were bringing the baby home and suddenly you come home and there's no baby, how did they
didn't think I was. I thought I was bringing the baby home. They thought they thought the baby would be taken adopted, as was told to them by the social worker, right? That this was going to be the best thing for their grandchild.
Okay. So already that massive deception right there, telling you one thing and them another.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, the thing was, legally, even when I first went into the hospital, as far as I was concerned, I was going to bring the baby home and later on marry my partner. He was still with me. And he used to come and visit me when I was working as a domestic. But my parents, they assumed the baby, as the social worker told them, was going to be adopted. So this is the kind of trickery that they did, where they were supposed to tell the parents exactly about the mental health damage that could be caused. They knew about all of that. I mean, who didn't know that if you have your baby taken off you, it's going to cause trauma? I mean, you don't have to be a doctor to know that. You only have to have a bit of common sense. But when I was asking for my baby and telling them I wanted to take my baby home, they didn't listen to me. They wouldn't take any notice of me. What they did instead was they just continued to drug me. Then on the last day, when they came with the paper for me to sign, then my mother comes to pick me up. There is no baby because she was told there would be no baby. I had wanted and asked to bring the baby home, but I haven't seen my baby. I'm now drugged and traumatized and thinking everything is my fault. So I'm broken. I'm a broken person. So I go home and I lie on my bed and I cry and I'm depressed. And my mother comes in and says, "Get off the bed, Christine. Get up. Haven't you put me through enough?" Put her through enough. And so there was no support. But again, as I said, I'm not going to blame my mother. It was a system. The social worker was supposed to be there to support me and to give me advice as to what was available. If I asked to see my baby, they were supposed to give me my baby. That was what was legally supposed to happen, but it's not what happened. So by the time my mother picks me up, I'm traumatized because I haven't seen my baby, so I haven't finished the birthing process. I've been drugged for days. I was in the hospital for about 15 days all up. And so I had been drugged for that level of time. And the last 5 days must have been very heavy because there's about 3 or 4 days where I have no memory. And then so by the time my mother comes, I'm just going home with her in this shocked, traumatized, bizarre state. And then I can't cope. And then my mother's angry with me. She doesn't know all the things that have happened. She doesn't realise how they've lied to her and how she's been gaslit and propagandised. And it's again, I bring people's attention back to what's just happened and what we've gone through in the last 3 years of the whole COVID debacle, and how families have been torn apart because somebody's got the jab and somebody else hasn't got the jab, and you can't come to Christmas because you haven't been jabbed, and you're going to kill granny, and all this stuff, all gaslighting, tearing people apart, undermining support, isolating people. That's what they did to us. So we just sort of look back, how did the Nazis do what they did? How did those doctors and nurses be able to come to work each day and hear mothers crying and screaming for their babies and then go home to their families in the evening? But they did. And they did it because they dehumanized us. We were neurotic women who had got pregnant out of wedlock. Now, that wasn't the whole of society, because if there was somebody who had a different belief system, they wouldn't have stayed employed at the hospital. They would have left in disgust, or they would have tried to help the mother, and then they would have got the sack. So by filtering out people and only having the Nazis working there, which was what it was like, that's what I felt. I felt like they were a concentration camp with a bunch of Nazis telling me, you do this, don't do that, you can't do this, and treating us like we were absolute subhumans. We weren't.
They're monsters. That just again highlights to me, any woman, whether you have had a baby or not, has that instant or that core knowing what your baby is for you. It's not something, and that's why I say whether you've physically given birth or not, I do believe every woman has that nurturing ability and understanding to know how traumatic that is for a woman. So for any of those women, those nurses, I mean, a male doctor, well, I can expect that more, especially if he's highly disconnected. But any of those nurses there watching you young girls go through that hit you on the hand because or yell at you because you happen to touch her pocket while
Yeah.
you're in pain and
Mm.
trauma, tells me there's not an ounce of humanity in that
No.
creature that's taken on a human body.
Mm.
So, I don't think we're dealing with normal human beings here, because as you say, anyone who does that is not of normal
No.
humanity. I'm
And then
sorry.
goes home in the evening to their own family
And has dinner.
has dinner after they've been stealing children all day, and they're involved with really what amounts to a child trafficking racket.
Totally. Exactly, because that is child trafficking.
And,
My question is then, who is that child, your daughter and everyone else's son and daughter? That specific baby would have been already had a home or a destination, or would have been already decided. It's like it's livestock farming,
that's
right?
right.
But at least with the livestock, any farmer knows you leave the baby with its mother for a certain amount of time, right?
Otherwise, you damage the cow and you damage the calf. Even with kittens and puppy dogs, they say you've got to leave it with the mother, otherwise they can't form an attachment with the owner. Now, you see, the way they treat a gorilla who's whose baby's died. It was all over our newspapers here, and all the male gorillas stand around the female who's had a stillborn, and she cuddles and cuddles and cuddles the baby until she puts the baby down in 3 or 4 days, and only when she's put the baby down do they all sort of leave. So it's a whole. It's so primal to us.
It's a ceremony. It's in our base. It's in our base DNA. Yeah.
And the people that work at the zoo understand that and respect that. But here are people looking after little humans still today, when people are employing surrogates to carry someone else's egg, maybe someone else's sperm, and then and what they're finding out now is the woman who's carrying the baby is actually getting cells from the baby she's carrying, and the baby's listening to her heartbeat. And so here we are in a kind of a modern thing, which is all built on the foundation of the happy adoption mythology. They've built this whole reproductive industry where the baby is the last person that is considered.
Yeah. I just want to say too that, as Chris has told, exactly what's happened to her, and it's a picture I've tried to paint. Not that I'm a mum who had her child stolen. I'm the opposite. I'm the child that was stolen. And, I can imagine what Christine's baby was not immediately even handed over to adoptive parents. It was hidden in the hospital. And it may not have gotten adopted within days or weeks. It could have been months, many months. We had babies that didn't even get adopted because they were babies that were not perfect enough to be adopted. It may have had something wrong with it. And this is the most horrific part about it, is we have stories of that, of babies that had mild or even severe disabilities that mum was willing to take home and love, that they still chose, because they couldn't find anybody willing to take this deformed or defective child. It then went into an institution. And we had a huge Royal Commission into institutional abuse in this country a few years back, which exposed the horrendous abuses by those that ran the institution, the sexual abuses, the physical abuses, the starvation, the putting them to work, no education. On top of that, there was also, they did experiments on these children, and one of them was experimenting with all the new vaccines. Because
that's right.
They didn't need parental consent. These were guinea pigs. And this is the thing, these babies had loving mothers who were willing to take them home, do the hard yards, even if they had to raise them as single mothers. And yet these babies were denied that right and were horrifically abused. And one of the saddest stories I've heard about it is there were some priests that adopted those babies, and when they had their Royal Commission into care, those children, now adults, who wanted to have their say and have the access to some form of compensation were disavowed that because they were adopted by the priests. They weren't, in the institution as an institution. They still were, but because they'd somehow maneuvered it to be adopted by the priests, they weren't allowed any voice or any compensation like myself. Any adoptee cannot get compensation for what happened to us.
There's many adoptees that were abused, Kerri, but so few will speak out about it.
Yeah, and we're hearing this more and more. I mean, of course, the immediate red light question that flashes up in my head is, what the hell were the priests adopting kids for anyway? What were they doing with those kids? Where did they go? Like, excuse me, I don't know what these creepster priests are capable of. Wow. I mean, the more we hear about this, and I'm so grateful that you ladies are speaking up and that more and more people are coming. And I'm seeing Joanne Breeze, who's a regular on our channel and a very generous contributor. So thank you, Joanne, just on this point. You've had a similar experience from what I'm seeing in the comments here, where you are saying, you made your bed, now live in it. That's what we were all told. How disgusting. I mean, you've made your bed, now live in it. I mean, it's tragic. Christine, I can't help but wonder, I hope your story has somewhat of a happy ending with your daughter. Have you ever managed to connect with her over the years?
Yes.
Did you find her?
But it wasn't a successful reunion. Unfortunately, the adoption industry likes to say, oh, well, they've now met, so isn't it wonderful? They've been reunited. But you've got two people who've got no history together, two people who were drugged and torn apart at birth, who suffer incredible psychological and physical damage from that rupture at the birth. And so you've got two people who are both suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, which most mothers and our stolen children suffer from. Then they've had abuse often in the adoptive homes on top of that. So then you have two very traumatized people coming together with no history. And as I said, I didn't even see my baby's face at the birth. And so many of the reunions do not work out because you've got two very damaged people. A lot of and also the fact there was so much gaslighting and propaganda and all that. And the society was told, well, these mothers were unmarried and they just wanted to get on with their lives. They didn't want a baby to hassle them, which was just bullshit, because the fact was, because I mean, if we didn't want our babies, why did they need to drug us? Why did they need to kidnap us? And why did they need to take our babies at the birth? Why didn't we just say, oh, well, here's the baby. No, that's not what happened. And then keep drugging us until they could get a consent out of it. I mean, I know some mothers who continued to speak out, and then they were often told their babies had died, only to find out many years later that because at that time all the files were closed, so they would just put it through as an ordinary adoption. And many years later, when they opened all the files, these now adult children would find their mothers. You can imagine the mother who'd been told she'd been grieving for this baby who she was told had died at birth, and suddenly there is this adult. So reunions aren't the answer. They can never make up for not seeing your child take its first step or utter its first words or be there for its schooling. You don't get that back. That's gone. And then when my daughter's got 4 children, so I have 4 grandchildren, I never see them. I haven't seen them for about 13 years. So it's not a happy ending. But the thing is, what I try, and I believe in God, and I believe that we all have a purpose, and I try and through my writing, through my research, through educating, I try to shine a light on what has been a very, very dark and evil chapter of Australian history. And that gives me satisfaction that I'm doing something to shine a light on something that is it's a small part of a very evil thing of stealing children, trafficking in children, kidnapping children, and using various legislations to cover up the crimes. And I put surrogacy into this, exploiting women in third world countries. I mean, you're not going to get Madonna or Nicole Kidman renting out their wombs. You know, they're the ones who are going to put their orders in and exploit, you know, those that are in a very vulnerable situation. So
Exactly.
it's really the whole infertility, what some people are now calling big infertility, I think that's what it was called. And basically throwing all that in, the surrogacy, the new thing they want to push, which is the artificial wombs. Can you imagine putting a baby in an artificial womb and it doesn't hear its mother's heart or the noises that a baby would hear, or the feeling or the thoughts, because the baby and the mother are totally connected, both by the heart and the brain. So the baby's experiencing the mother as part of the mother, not as a separate being, but as part of the mother. So when the baby is first born, it still thinks it's part of its mother. So when you remove that baby, it's lost its center and it thinks it's going to die. So the baby goes into absolute trauma. Whoever whether it's a surrogate mother or whatever, that's what the baby knows, that's its environment. So I guess by us speaking out, even though, I've been doing it for a long time, but, maybe with what's gone on, I think a lot of people's eyes have been opened to what illegalities our governments can get up to. And whereas before we may not have been listened to, people are realising, yes, the government is capable of doing very bad things to people, and that there are a lot of quite evil practices going on that have been hidden, but with the internet and what have you, it's been exposed. So I guess, we must sort of think of it as being it's the right time.
I just want to say that when I met Chris, I didn't fully grasp what the mums had been through. And I knew that because I'd met my biological mum and it wasn't going well, and I couldn't understand why. I'm actually writing that part in my book at the moment and pulling it to pieces. And when I met Chris and Chris, we'd have discussions, quite in-depth ones. And Chris was able to share with me a greater picture of what my mother and the trauma that she would have experienced. So then that helped me to understand why things weren't working out with my biological mother and why they were unlikely to, because she never got the help she received. You have to remember, when I was searching and when Chris was having the baby, there was nothing about counselling to do with trauma or forced adoption. Queensland only had its apology in 2013, so it's been 10 years. But even now, the expertise and the ability of these counsellors are still are falling short at such a large level that they're not able to give us the support and help educate us like the mothers have. And so adoptees are not getting anywhere near the help that they need and deserve, and neither are the mothers.
No. We're up against a multi-billion-dollar industry. There's still plenty of people that want to adopt or buy a child from a surrogate or whatever. And so that's why what's happened in Australia is we've had a number of inquiries, a number of exposure, but you keep finding it gets memory hold, it gets suppressed. So it bubbles up, gets some exposure, then it gets pushed back down. And that's because there's very powerful interests who still want to have this this child trafficking industry continue on. That's why I think that's why we have to keep speaking out and saying it's not a fairy tale. It causes enormous pain to the mother and child. And if people want to get an understanding of it, think of when they've seen somebody who's had a child kidnapped, because that's what it felt like to me. It would be the same as if somebody climbed through your window and took your baby out of the bassinet, out of the cot, and took off. And you didn't know where your baby was. You didn't know who had it. You didn't know whether that baby was dead or alive. And you're in so much grief, so much pain, so much terror and shock that in the end, people who've had their children kidnapped are praying for even the baby to be found, even if it's dead, because they want to end the pain. It's so incredibly, it's like being tortured. The pain is so bad. And so to survive what we went through, we had to really suppress. And that's what I was trying to explain before. Years later, it was starting when I could get, after actually I had met my daughter for the first time, because remember, I'd never seen her face. And that's the other thing that happens to mothers too, Kerri, and probably what happened with your mum, is when you have your baby taken off you, there's a part of your mind or part of your personality that gets frozen in time. So it's frozen back when your mother first gave birth, because I remember the first time I met my daughter outside the womb, basically, and she's 18 years old, and there was a part of me, and I could hear it. It was like I had two parts of my mind, and I could hear one part of my personality saying, where's the baby? They've made a mistake. Where's the baby? And the other part of my mind's, wake up, Christine. That was 1969. She looks like you. So I could literally feel these two parts of my mind in conflict. And one part I realised had been frozen in trauma back in 1969, still waiting for someone to bring me my baby. Still waiting.
Yeah.
Wow. That is so profound, what you've just said there. And I really think it's that trauma that freezes us up. And we have no idea how to move into it, through it, beyond it, above it, below it, whatever. It really just remains that part of you that is frozen in time. How did you find, after the initial connection with her, I know you said it didn't pan out well, sure, but I'm just thinking in that moment, the first conversations, seeing...
Meeting her, it was almost like I'd had a big explosion of emotion when I heard that I was going to meet her. I remember I was on the phone, this scream came from my stomach, came from my gut, and I screamed. And I remember my kids coming in and my husband at the time coming in and saying, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I didn't even try, but it was a guttural sound that came from my gut, where I literally, there was so much energy that had been held down that I'd suppressed. And then after I met her, it was like, when I first came face to face, I felt numb, and there was that conflict within my mind. Where's the baby? They've made a mistake. And then after that, it was, I felt when I was talking to her that I was talking, she was 18. I kept feeling like I was younger, but I was the younger person in the relationship. It was very bizarre. And like Kerri said, there was no counselling. There was no support for us. They supported adoptive families because the adoptive parents had been very angry, and they said the government had abused their trust because the government had promised that they would never allow their adopted children to find out their real parents. That would never happen. And now the government, to placate the adopting parents, put up the post-adoption centres for counselling, but they were mainly focused on and tell you that they had no understanding of the trauma or the grief. They put in charge of the New South Wales one, the Post-Adoption Resource Centre, they put the consent takers, the very people who stole our babies, who were taking the consent, they put them in charge of our counselling. I mean, can you imagine sending someone who had their child kidnapped to the kidnapper for counselling? I mean, you would think that's insane. That's insanity. But that was what was expected of us. And that's how the government has tried to keep us suppressed. And I believe they don't like us using the term stolen either. You know, they want us to use forced adoption because that can give them, oh, well, you know, it wasn't that bad. It was just, you know, they made that decision because it was a bit difficult at the time. No, I didn't make a decision at all.
You were robbed. You were
I
robbed
was
of your.
robbed. I stole of my life, of my partner. I would have got married to that partner. So he had his child stolen. You know, there's a lot of people that, not just the mother, but the fathers that wanted. There were many fathers that wanted to marry their mothers, but maybe the parents didn't want them at a young age to get married. But when the mother went into the hospital and she wanted to see the baby, she had every right to be assisted to leave, irrespective of what the parents wanted. They were supposed to assist us. And if our parents weren't supportive, they were supposed to assist us with financial benefits or lodging, or not drug us and traumatise us into absolutely, you know, so shocked we didn't know whether we were coming or going.
I like the flip side that they would say to that, Chris, was especially through the Senate inquiry, and they just wanted to make it all about the mothers and not about adoptees at all. And you and I fought very hard together to get adoptees' voices on there. And I know that there were some mums that rang the committee, the Senate committee, demanding that I speak at the Senate inquiry because I was one of the few adoptees that was speaking very loudly. But I loved how the politicians' response, and that was basically, oh, well, we kidnapped you. Like this, I'm doing a sort of like a paraphrase. We kidnapped the child. But, gee, the kidnappers looked after it all right. It turned out okay. Because it's basically what they were saying. They were saying to the mother, to us adoptees, well, you all went off and had good lives, so you don't need to be part of the inquiry. It all worked out well. Like that's what they said. But what they said, what they're saying, it's like, well, it's a kidnapper came in through the window and took my baby. It'd be like these babies going, well, did the kidnapper treat you well? Oh, that's all right. You know, the kidnapper doesn't need to. You should be happy. Be grateful.
You should be grateful, Kerri. Oh, my God.
And, I mean, there were many adoptees that did go to loving homes, but what about the ones like myself that I was working in charcoal pits from the time I was 5, used as child slave labour, and tortured and beaten and set alight and threatened and, like oh, my goodness. And I'm going to these politicians, you know, lobbying for an inquiry, trying to tell them, and I'm having this politician tell me that I need to be grateful because I went off and had a good life, you know, like, oh, my mother would have abused me, you know, like, anyway. So, you know.
That's all part of the adoption fairy tale, you know, and that's why they want to use that term with us, forced adoption, because there was so much.
It's fairy tale to me.
Yeah, so because it's all part of the brainwashing and the gaslighting, you know, we'll just keep it sort of soft and fluffy. We can call the Aboriginal stolen generations because that was way back in a racist past. But to really acknowledge that this happened to, as an Aboriginal mother once said to me when I was at a discussion, she said, no wonder they did it to us. They did it to their own. And that's the dirty little secret.
Wow. If you
So
can do
they'll
it,
acknowledge the stolen generation, but not us. We're sort of a little bit on the side. We're just forced adoption. Very unpleasant. Shouldn't have happened. We're all very sorry, but
there's a bit of money. There's a bit of money to shut you up and appease you because we know money makes you happy.
Well, they didn't even give us. They haven't even given us any money, and the money that they've given for is such a pittance. The money for mental health services, they gave $11.5 million for the whole of Australia for all the mothers, the fathers, the adoptees, the subsequent children who may have had problems. Because remember, when the mother went on and had subsequent children, they were dealing with or had a traumatized mother, and they also had the loss of a sibling, a loss of a sister or a brother. So all these people, I mean, if you look at the number of people that have been impacted by this, it's at least a couple of million Australians.
Yeah.
And if we don't shine a light and expose this very dark side of the whole reproduction industry, then it's just going to continue, and children are going to continue to be hurt. And, you know, because people are being told this fairy tale.
It's so true what you call it, the reproduction industry, because that is truly what it is. It is quite disgusting. It is quite heartbreaking, and really the root of destruction in a family and in a person and in a child's life. Because for that child to begin its humble beginnings with that as its experience, and we know many of these kids go on to be trafficked in the system, SRA'd, they forced into hierarchy positions where they are abused and forced to do things against their will. Their gifts are abused, their talents are brutalized. It's really the beginnings of a very, and I'm going to say this in layman's terms, fucked up world, because that's what it is. This is how they begin to break us, and this is how they begin to split us. And honestly, it's these conversations that are going to be the healing, because this is where the splitting is, and this is where the conversations need to take place. Because the more people, and as you say, and as we always say, the more people who talk about this, bring it to the fore, shed light on the topic, the more we're realizing, and it's so true, it's not a forced adoption, because the difference between forced adoption, the word, let's talk about the word forced adoption. Okay, forced adoption could mean I was pregnant when I was 14 and my parents decided I was too young, so they forced me to give my child up for adoption, but they still love me and what have you, they were kind to me and what have you, right? But there's still that loss of the baby. These are stolen babies. These are babies that have been ripped. And as you say, you didn't even get to see your baby. You had people treating you like crap and never ever got to see your child. The damage is pretty much irreparable. So it's not just your story like that and Kerri's story like that, but countless stories like that. And this is how we heal. You know, this is how we reconnect those little broken strands and threads. Might not be with our own biological family, but certainly with our spirit family, because so many people have been through these traumas. Wow.
And like you said, you know, just to finish off, it's also the destruction of society. Because if you're going to, you know, break up the family, like I said, the ripple effect as it moves out, you know, to the subsequent children, grandchildren.
Huge. We are a race of majority of, because more and more we're hearing about this. You know, I'm one of the fortunate, and I'm going to almost say few right now, because I do feel like I'm in a fortunate few where I've never had that happen. And that sort of stuff is not apparent in my family at all. It's not present, or not apparent rather, but present. We've had other issues, but not those, right? But the more we're hearing, you know, and the more people that are stepping forward, it's really a huge part of society that has had these traumas imposed upon them, which is why, as you say, you know, it's a fragmented society. When the child, to begin with, is ripped from its mother's womb, it is immediately in pain and immediately in turmoil. And no matter who tries to comfort that child, it's never going to get the comfort that it will from its mother. And not just the mother, you know, makes me sad that your partner was there. And in these situations, so often men are disregarded, right? Because men, even worse than women, will not talk about their feelings. It's only in recent years men have started speaking. I don't even want to think about the trauma that your partner had, waiting for you to come out with your baby, right? Thinking life's going to be good. Suddenly he's not just dealing with the loss of his baby, but the trauma of his girlfriend. How's that a man's beginnings to relationships, right? That breaks something in him. And so again, we're not just talking about the traumatized mother, but the traumatized father as well, who never gets a platform for this because men just deal with it, don't they? Right?
Well,
So
he told me things years later. I mean, it was the time. People didn't discuss things like they do now. There was kind of like a you just didn't discuss a lot of, even with your partner, a lot of very personal issues. But he never went on to have children, any further children. He married a woman who had children. So, and I know a lot of the fathers who didn't go on and have further children.
there in itself tells you what the trauma is.
Yeah.
They could not bear the loss of another child. So they're either going to manifest in their physical being infertility, or a wife is infertile and then not adopt or whatever. I've seen this a lot as well, right? And or just as you say, marry a wife who has children already and love those children maybe as much as what they can and be great stepdaddies. But at the end of the day, it's always that safe distance, isn't it? Wow. Wow. What a fantastic conversation. Christine, I would definitely, and I know I don't even have to ask Kerri.
Yeah, no, it'd be great. Yes.
Yeah.
I'd love to see Christine come back because, yeah, she sheds a light on even deeper still. You know, I've tried to share as much as I can, and there's still more to come. But it's good to have someone like Christine validate it, who has experienced it from her side as the mother, and has spoken to, you know, many more mothers, because my role has been to support adopted people.
Yes.
So I hear a majority of their stories. And I'm ever so grateful for Chris. You know, when I went public with my story for the very first time, I was terrified of how the world was going to treat me. And Christine was one of the first ones that contacted me. And we started to create a friendship based out of the trauma of that. And, you know, I've learned a great deal from her. And I know that she has felt, a tremendous rapport with me, and very grateful that as an adopted person, because there were very few, if any, speaking out like I was, you know, and
you were the first one that I knew of.
Yeah, and Chris made me feel good, because remember, I told my story when I went public. I ended up in the hospital, like, because I was absolutely terrified, and of course I had Christine reaching out to me and reinforcing to me that my voice was valued and extremely important, and invited me to be part of the Apology Alliance, which was made up of many other groups of victims. And she asked me to come on board as a representative for adoptees. And I think within weeks, Christine had me on a teleconference with Canberra and speak to federal politicians. That's how quickly she snap-foozled me up. Absolutely terrified. So, and Chris has seen me grow over the years, and, you know, really, know my subject, and really have talked to many victims to understand the politics of it and the history of it, to be able to continue to do my work. So I want to thank Christine for not giving up, and I want to thank Christine for all her hard work. It's been very much appreciated from adoptees like myself.
Thank you, Kerri.
You're welcome.
And I want to thank both of you for being here.
Thanks.
Really.
And thank you so much, you know, you and Monet and those that support this channel and tune in and allow and listen to our stories. You know, we're really appreciative of that. It's heartwarming to know that when we had no voice, initially we had nothing, and we have, you know, thousands of people that tune in to your channel and are extremely supportive of us continuing to tell our stories, and are willing to hear us. And that's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
And likewise, and, you know, I always love to give a shout out to our viewers, because without them, you know, the channel wouldn't be, we wouldn't, you know, and just all the time, just hearing a little bit more, somebody popping out of the woodwork. There's always every now and again, there's a different name who tells their story. You know, we start getting to know our viewers and who watches what channel or what guest type thing. It's really good. And just the support that we're getting from the viewers for our guests who are telling, who are starting to tell really deep hidden stuff that's very traumatic, and you've got to really have your wits about you and understand that we really are working against some very dark forces on the planet. There's no doubt about that. So we have to be aware of spiritually how important it is that we can keep ourselves armored up, if you want, in that way, and really just know that this is a fight for God, for the right, for your creator, whatever, and it's a fight that we walk, that we, I don't want to say combative, but it's a battle that we're in, and the more of us that link hands, we find our way through it, and the more these atrocities are exposed, because every one of them to me is horrifying. No matter what it is, no matter who it is, each and every one is horrifying. I'm like, some of these creatures, it just makes, one realize just how out of touch with themselves they are to be able to continue and to be participating in these types of things. However, we have had a 90-minute conversation today, which has really been amazing. So thank you so much to you beautiful ladies for joining me, Kerri and Christine. And we definitely look forward to having you back again. And we're looking at some cool guests on this show as well, and as we always say to our viewers, if there are any of you out there who have a similar story to tell, similar type story, to tell, either as a mother or a father or a stolen baby, or just an adopted person who was in a loving home, we'd love to hear those stories too, because that's important for us to hear as well, the feel-good stories, because I know there are those out there as well. It's not all just horrors, but it's really good to hear how everyone has experienced their lives if you've been part of the adoption, I want to say agenda, because I think that's what it is. Reproductive agenda. I was trying to think of the word there, reproductive agenda. Crazy. Anyway, everybody, God bless you all. And again, thank you so much to our Patreons, because without you, our channel wouldn't be. And I know, Kerri, you one of those. Thank you. So God bless you, everybody. I'll see you later with Jessie. We will be with Jessie at 3:00 my time.
Oh,
So
terrific.
Yeah,
she was lazy.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'll have to. What time is that where we are on the other side of the world?
It's 2.5 hours from now. It's 12:30 here now. And I know Jessie wasn't able to make, she was feeling under the weather on Wednesday. So we've rescheduled for today. So yeah, fabulous busy Friday here on Ara. Take care, everybody. God bless you.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.